Well, joining us now is Tim Johnson, chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, the Frederick Douglass Foundation is a public policy and educational organization which brings the sanctity of free market and limited government ideas to bear on the hardest problems facing our nation. You started this organization yourself just a couple years ago. Why is it that your message has resonated as it has?
Well, I think we've been very clear about our uniqueness in the marketplace, if you will. When you think about the number of even black Republican organizations that are out there, we did some things that were unique from the very beginning. First, that we're devoted Christians, and we stand on the word first and foremost. We came out very pro-life, as well as believing that marriage is composed of born a man, born a woman, married to one another, one at a time. We also were able to put together our calendar. We had a summit that we came out with. So our calendar is in this third iteration. We're also doing our third summit. So you think that we were incorporated in December of 2008, and by March of 2009 we were having our first summit and already released our first calendar. On top of that, in 2010, we were the only organization that had a comprehensive list of all the black candidates that were run as Republicans throughout the country. So, you know, you look at the combination of those things, I say all of it is due to God gracing us and allowing us to be that vehicle. This was really about a dream that I had, and then it was confirmed by our vice chairman, who's also a pastor. And we've just continued to do what God has ordained us to do, has given us this as a ministry. And we recognize it's very important. And then the issues that we talk about are relevant in all the communities, but we have a special emphasis that we place in the black community.
Now, moving forward, what role do you want the organization to have in the context of the American political discourse?
Well, you know, one of the things that we think is important is, as it relates down to the dialogue that we're creating, you know, we believe first and foremost in the education part of our mission to educate people. We also believe that there are some public policies out there that disproportionately obviously affect the black community, and we need to be willing to talk about that from a Republican perspective. We're against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You know, from our Christian beliefs, we'd rather Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't on the table, but at that's the compromise we're willing to go. We wish abortion wasn't on the table. And I bring those two issues up in particular because abortion disproportionately affects the black community. And so when it disproportionately affects the black community, then that means it disproportionately affects us in politics and everything else. And so we've stayed at this 12 to 14% national rate of population for far too long, and it's because of this abortion issue. When you look at incarceration rates, when you look at the dropout rate within the school system, all these things disproportionately affect the black community. And we get the argument from the liberals who want more government dependency, but you don't get the argument of talking about self-determination and self-reliance and about educating people so that people can determine their own fate versus looking for the government to take them out of poverty. So that's the conversation we have, and that's kind of the role that I think we'll have.
Now, Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery. He went on to become a statesman and the leader of the abolitionist movement. And after the Civil War, he was still very active in keeping the U.S. the land of the free. Given the growing government reach these last 2 years under President Obama, what do you think the president could learn from Frederick Douglass? Well,
you know, he would have to go completely in the opposite direction if he actually took the leadership and understanding the readings of Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass didn't believe that blacks should be dependent on the government. He even said it. He said, you know, if the Negro falls, let him fall. You know, it's not the government's responsibility to hold them up. And of course, we see for the last 2 years and under liberal administrations that they create another plantation system where blacks become dependent upon the system. They get them through jobs and they get them through programs. And we have to change that dynamic because that's hurting all of Americans, not just a group of Americans, even though a lot of times it's isolated on blacks, but it's really putting us in a pigeonhole where people perceive that when they see a black person, that person must want to be on government dependency. And that's not a mindset that Frederick Douglass would support at all.
Now, historically, black and African Americans have aligned themselves with the Democratic Party, but do you think that's beginning to change, especially when we see Republicans like Representative Allen West of Florida and Tim Scott of South Carolina getting elected?
Well, and when you say historical, I want to put that in context of maybe the last 50, 60 years historical, because we know that when the Republican Party is the party of Emancipation Proclamation, today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, and how powerful it is to think that that was the man that, regardless of why he did it, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation that was issued January 1st, 1863 to free the blacks. The Republican Party has always been the party of civil rights movement. The Republican Party is the party of women's suffrage, and most people don't recognize that. So historically, if we go back to the beginning of the Republican Party, it was the party of blacks. As the last 50 years, and through Martin Luther King and some other things that took place in the Civil Rights Bill, where people have a short memory, you've seen that. But yeah, I think things are changing because as the question goes out, what has the Democratic Party done for you? Has it really benefited you? Are you better off now than you were before? And as people start looking at that, and 2 and 3 generations have gone through this commitment to the Democratic Party, they're recognizing that that commitment has fallen real short of their expectations. And at the very least, the Republican Party deserves an opportunity. And if nothing else, people recognize that they need not necessarily to be committed to one party, but really know the issues and be more unaffiliated, if you will, or independent thinking, and say that whoever's going to speak that language that affects my community and affects my issues, I'm going to be more willing to vote for them versus blindly voting.
What impact do you see Allen West and Tim Scott having on the Congressional Black Caucus?
You know, the nice thing about Tim Scott and Allen West is they're not monolithic thinkers any more than they're monolithic looking. Too oftentimes people think that because they're both the Republican, they're saying, obviously we know that Allen is more combative and he's willing to go after the CBC and say some things that are a straight shooter. Tim is more diplomatic, more polished because he's been a politician for a few more years. Both of them are coming out of the South. But yet at the same time, they present something a little different. Each one is coming with a little different perspective and a little different twist in their conversation. And I think that's important because white America shouldn't start assuming that because you have 2 black Republicans and they're always on the same agreement with each other. I think they agree in a lot of areas and they disagree in a lot of areas. And I think that's what our nation needs to see, is that even as Republicans, we can still be unique and have a different perspective. Still with a common goal is the same, but how we get there, we may get there differently.
Tim Johnson, Chairman and Founder of the Frederick Douglass Foundation, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If folks want to find out more about your organization, where can they go?
They can go and visit our website at www.tfdf.org.
Tim Johnson, thanks so much.
Thank you.